January 24, 1989, Florida State Prison. Before sunrise, a crowd gathers outside. Some are praying, some are cheering. Reporters, survivors, onlookers, all drawn to the final moments of a man who once charmed America. Inside, a former law student named Theodore Robert Bundy sits quietly in a holding cell. He declines his final meal, offers no words to the press. When the guards arrive to escort him to the electric chair, he simply turns and says, "Jim and Fred, give my love to my family and friends." At 7:16 a.m., 2,000 volts course through his body. He doesn't scream, he doesn't cry, he just ends. But this is not where his story begins, it's where it ends. To understand how a clean-cut, intelligent, charismatic man became one of the most prolific and sadistic serial predators in American history, we have to go back, long before the trials, the escapes, the confessions, back to a house of secrets, and a boy born in shame. He was born Theodore Robert Cowell in 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, an unwanted child in a world built on shame. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was 22, unmarried and devoutly religious. To her conservative family, an illegitimate birth was a stain that could never be scrubbed clean. So they hid him, first in a home for unwed mothers, then behind a lie. Louise brought her baby back to her parents in Philadelphia and told everyone he was her little brother. For the first years of his life, Ted Bundy believed his grandparents were his parents. He believed his mother was his older sister. But the truth has a way of bleeding through. His grandfather, Sam Cowell, was a cruel man, a bigot, a wife-beater, a man who abused animals and ruled the house through fear. Ted's grandmother suffered from debilitating depression, medicated into silence. The house wasn't filled with violence every day, but it pulsed beneath the walls. What people saw from outside was calm. What Ted saw was rage stitched beneath the surface. Later in life, when he discovered the truth, that he was born out of wedlock, that the woman he thought was his sister was his mother, the betrayal would calcify into resentment he never forgave her. Not for the shame, not for the silence, not for the lie. Eventually, Louise fled with Ted to Tacoma, Washington, hoping to start fresh. She married Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a kind working-class man who adopted Ted and gave him his last name. But Ted never accepted him. He saw Johnny as weak, beneath him, someone who worked with his hands and came home smelling like it. In school, Bundy was shy but bright. He had few friends. Teachers remembered a quiet, polite boy, but classmates would say he didn't quite connect. He watched more than he played, smiled without feeling, a shadow always slightly out of place. By adolescence, the signs were there, not just social detachment, but something darker. He began to steal, to spy on women through their windows, to dream of violence. He later claimed his earliest victim may have died when he was just 12 or 13, a childhood accident that left a young boy lifeless in the woods during a disturbing game. Whether true or another layer of manipulation is still debated, but what's clear is this: the darkness came early, and it never let go. In the late 1960s, Ted Bundy appeared to be on the rise. He enrolled at the University of Puget Sound, then transferred to the University of Washington. He studied Chinese, dropped out, re-enrolled as a psychology major. He was now polished, well-spoken, ambitious. Professors called him brilliant. Classmates remembered him as thoughtful, mature, even charming. He became an honors student, volunteered on political campaigns, wrote speeches for Republican candidates, shook hands, smiled wide, looked the part. If you met him, you'd say he was going places, that he was the kind of man who'd one day be in courtrooms or Congress. But the truth was already rotting underneath. Behind closed doors, Bundy was isolating, lying compulsively, shoplifting, spying on women from bushes and windows. His sexual fantasies had grown darker, more violent. Not just control, but total domination. The kind that erased personhood, that reduced a woman to an object, to be used, discarded, or kept. In 1969, he tried to abduct a woman for the first time. He failed. She fought back. He ran. But the line had already been crossed. The fantasy had stepped into the real world. 2 years later, he tried again. This time, he struck another woman from behind, but she screamed, and again he fled. He wasn't taking lives yet, but he was circling the edge, tightening the noose, and with every attempt he learned how to isolate, how to lure, how to dominate without a trace. Around this time, he met Diane Edwards, a woman he would later call the first love of his life. Elegant, upper class, dark-haired. She represented everything he believed he deserved, but didn't have. She broke up with him. The story goes that it devastated him, that it triggered the violence. But that's not the truth. Bundy's urges didn't begin with Diane. He had already attempted abductions, already harbored violent desires. What she represented wasn't the cause. It was a symbol of status, of rejection, of what he felt entitled to. Years later, he reconnected with her, wooed her back, and then, with no warning, cut her off and vanished. He didn't want love. He wanted revenge, control, power, possession, not just of her, but of everything. But Bundy's descent was far from over. By 1972, he was a psychology graduate. He applied to law school, worked a suicide prevention hotline, and impressed nearly everyone he met. Anne Rule, his co-worker on the hotline, and later his biographer, described him as kind, calm, and deeply attentive to people in crisis. No one suspected the truth. Not yet. But under the surface, the fantasies were growing sharper, more elaborate, more practiced. That same year, he admitted to breaking into a woman's apartment for the first time. He attempted to suffocate her in her sleep, and again fled when she resisted. But by now, Bundy was no longer backing down. He began stalking women, watching them walk to their cars, their apartments, their libraries. He studied their routines, memorized patterns, and when the moment was right, he struck. The horror began in early 1974. Young women, mostly white, mostly college students, started disappearing in Washington state. They were all in their early 20s. All had long, dark hair parted in the middle. All vanished without a sound. Linda Ann Healy was among the first, a bright, talented student. She disappeared from her basement apartment in Seattle on January 31st. Her bed was neatly made, but something wasn't right. The pillow was stained. A nightgown and her shoes were missing. So was she. Then came Donna Gail Manson, then Susan Rancourt, then Roberta Parks, then Brenda Ball. They were taken from campuses, libraries, student unions, no witnesses, no forced entries, no bodies. By July, fear had taken hold across the Pacific Northwest. Women changed their hair, stopped walking alone, traveled in groups, and still, the disappearances continued. Then something brazen. Lake Sammamish State Park, July 14, 1974. Thousands of people gathered under the summer sun, and in broad daylight, 2 women vanished. Janice Ott, Denise Naslund. Witnesses described a man in a sling, asking women for help loading a sailboat into his tan Volkswagen Beetle. He introduced himself with one name, Ted. It was the break investigators needed. Sketches were made, descriptions matched, tip lines were opened, and calls poured in. Among them, Elizabeth Klopfer, Bundy's girlfriend, a DES employee, a professor at the University of Washington. All pointed to the same man. All said the same thing. I think it might be him. But the tips were lost in a flood of names. Bundy was charming, educated, well-spoken. He didn't fit the profile, so police moved on. In the fall of 1974, Bundy moved to Utah, supposedly to attend law school. But the violence followed. On October 2nd, Nancy Wilcox vanished in Salt Lake City. On October 18th, Melissa Smith was taken. On Halloween, Laura Amy disappeared. 3 weeks later, Bundy approached a woman named Carol DeRanch inside a shopping mall. He told her he was a police officer, that her car had been broken into and she needed to come with him. She got in his car. What happened next would become one of the most terrifying survival stories in true crime history. He drove her to a secondary location. When she realized they weren't going to the police station, she fought. He handcuffed one wrist, but she jumped out of the car, ran into traffic, screamed for help. Bundy vanished, but for the first time, he left someone alive. And Carol remembered everything. By 1975, Bundy's spree stretched across multiple states: Washington, Oregon, Utah, and now Colorado. Dozens of women missing. Still no suspect, but then a mistake. On an August 16, 1975, a Utah highway patrolman noticed a tan Volkswagen Beetle driving suspiciously through a residential area at night. He pulled it over. Inside, ski mask, rope, handcuffs, and a crowbar. The driver gave his name, Ted Bundy. The officer had no idea he'd just arrested one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. Back at the station, detectives remembered the Lake Sammamish witness sketch. The tan Beetle, the name, Ted. Carol DeRanch picked him out of a lineup, and suddenly, Bundy had a name, a face, and a court date. In 1976, he stood trial in Utah for the attempted kidnapping of Carol DeRanch. He was convicted, sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. But that wasn't the end. Far from it. Colorado wanted him next, connected to the chilling case of Karen Campbell, a nurse who disappeared from a hotel in Aspen. She had been found in a snowbank, beaten severely and left in the woods. Bundy was transferred for trial, but once again, he had a plan. In June 1977, during a court recess in Aspen, he was left alone in the law library. He jumped from a second-story window, vanished into the mountains. A 6-day manhunt followed. He broke into a cabin, stole supplies, and was eventually recaptured. Still, he wasn't done. That December, while awaiting trial in Glenwood Springs, He sawed a hole in the ceiling of his cell, crawled through the ductwork, climbed into the apartment of the jailer, put on civilian clothes, and walked right out the front door. This time, he didn't look back. He fled to Florida. And what happened next would define the final chapter of horror. Florida, 1978. Ted Bundy arrived in Tallahassee using the alias Chris Hagen. He rented a room at a boarding house near Florida State University. He told people he was from out of town, job hunting, quiet, polite, friendly even. Nobody asked questions, and Bundy knew how to stay invisible until he chose not to. On January 15th, just after 3 a.m., Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house through a rear door with a broken lock. Inside were sleeping college students, young women who had spent the night studying, laughing, talking with friends. What happened next lasted less than 15 minutes, but left an entire nation stunned. Bundy first entered the room of Margaret Bowman. He beat her with a piece of firewood, then turned a nylon stocking into a weapon and silenced her. He moved to Lisa Levy's room. He beat her, silenced her, bit her, assaulted her with a hairspray bottle. She died within minutes. He then moved through the house into the rooms of Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner. Both were badly hurt but miraculously survived. In less than 15 minutes, 4 women had been mercilessly assaulted. 2 didn't survive. Bundy fled into the night. A few blocks away, he broke into another apartment. There, he attacked Cheryl Thomas, beating her so severely that her jaw was shattered and her hearing permanently damaged. She survived. This wasn't careful or calculated. This was rage, raw, frenzied, and out of control. Bundy had spiraled. And now, Florida was on high alert. But Bundy didn't stop. On February 9th, just 3 weeks later, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach disappeared from her middle school in Lake City, Florida. She was last seen being led across the school courtyard by a man, described by witnesses as clean-cut and confident. Her body would be found weeks later, in a pig shed. She had been taken, struck, left in the dirt like trash. It was the crime that shattered any remaining illusion that Bundy could be explained or rehabilitated. And then, a traffic stop changed everything. February 15th, 1978, Pensacola, Florida. Officer David Lee noticed a suspicious Volkswagen Beetle driving erratically. He pulled it over. Bundy gave a fake ID. The car was stolen. He fought the officer, tried to flee, but was subdued and arrested. Back at the station, fingerprints revealed the truth. The man in custody was not Chris Hagen. He was Theodore Robert Bundy, escaped fugitive implicated in multiple unresolved cases, and now the main suspect in what happened at Chi Omega and to Kimberly Leach. Florida authorities knew they had him, and this time he wasn't going anywhere. The trial that followed was unlike anything the American justice system had seen. Televised nationwide, it was a media circus. Cameras in the courtroom, reporters lining the steps, sketches splashed across newspapers. Bundy, ever the narcissist, insisted on representing himself. He cross-examined witnesses, objected to prosecutors, referred to himself in the third person. At one point, he proposed, in court, to Carol Ann Boone, a former co-worker and loyal supporter. She said yes. They were married right there, during the trial, As evidence mounted, including bite marks that matched his teeth exactly, the courtroom gasped. Witnesses cried, jurors stared in disbelief. One survivor, Kathy Kleiner, recalled waking to the sound of Bundy attacking her roommate and the flash of light from a car outside that briefly illuminated his face. That flash may have saved her life. It startled him, and he fled. The prosecution painted a clear picture of a predator who moved across states, stalked his victims, assaulted them, and in some cases, returned to the scene of horror. Forensic experts testified to his methods. Survivors described his charm and the coldness in his eyes. Jurors were shaken, but Bundy stayed calm. In July 1979, Ted Bundy was found guilty in the Chi Omega case. He received the maximum penalty under the law, but that wasn't the end. Florida brought him back to court, this time for what happened to Kimberly Leach. In February 1980, he was convicted and given a third death sentence. In total, Bundy received 3 death sentences across 2 trials. Still, he fought. He appealed, gave interviews, changed lawyers, blamed pornography society, even the media, for what he'd done. He begged for clemency, insisted he'd changed, claimed he could help investigators solve other crimes. He spoke to criminal profilers, including William Hagmaier of the FBI, offering insights into his mind. They developed a rapport. Bundy saw Hagmaier as one of the few people he could trust, but even as he shared details, he remained manipulative. He hinted at unknown victims, lied, teased. On the eve of his execution, he confessed to 30 homicides across 7 states, but authorities believe the number may be far higher. He described how he disjointed remains with a hacksaw, how he applied makeup to their bodies, washed their hair, took Polaroids, revisited bodies, sometimes for days, until wild animals destroyed them. His final hours were quiet. He met with his lawyer, Jim Coleman, and Methodist minister Fred Lawrence. He declined a last meal, refused the comfort of a priest, gave no final interview. On January 24, 1989, at 7:06 a.m., prison guards entered his cell. At 7:16 a.m., Ted Bundy was strapped into the electric chair at Florida State Prison. He looked straight ahead. His final words were directed at Coleman and Lawrence. "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." A moment later, 2,000 volts surged through his body. His hands clenched, his skin blistered. Then silence. Bundy was pronounced dead. He was 42 years old. Outside the prison, the crowd erupted. Some held signs, "Burn, Bundy, burn." Others cheered. For many, justice had finally arrived. But for the families of his victims, there would never be closure. Ted Bundy's execution didn't end the story. If anything, it opened new questions. How did this man fool so many for so long? How did law enforcement, media, and society fail to see what hid behind that smile? In the years since, Bundy's case has become a staple in FBI training sessions. His manipulations, his escapes, his psychological profile, all dissected in criminal justice classrooms across the country. He wasn't insane. He wasn't out of control. He was deliberate. He planned, adapted, learned from every mistake, and evolved. His preferred methods were quiet, strangulation, blunt force trauma. His tools were common: crowbars, ropes, ski masks, his own charm. He worked across a wide geographic area, blurring the jurisdictional lines that made early detection nearly impossible. He changed his appearance constantly, lost or gained weight, wore glasses, grew a beard. He even concealed the one distinct mole on his neck with turtlenecks and sweaters. Witnesses described him differently every time. His Volkswagen Beetle, tan, brown, or bronze, depending on who saw it, was the perfect vehicle. Plain, reliable, forgettable. And Bundy himself, he was a psychological chameleon. He could appear harmless, funny, engaged. He could cry on cue, shake hands with judges, smile for the camera. But behind it all was something empty, a total lack of empathy, a hunger for control and destruction. According to FBI profiler William Hagmeyer, Bundy scored 39 out of 40 on the psychopathy checklist. Experts concluded he had antisocial personality disorder, possibly narcissistic personality disorder as well. But no delusions, no hallucinations, no excuse. Bundy blamed his actions on many things: his abusive grandfather, the absence of his biological father, the lies told by his mother, alcohol, the media, pornography, even the women themselves. In a 1977 letter, he wrote, "I have known people who radiate vulnerability, they're facial. Expressions say, 'I'm afraid of you.' These people invite abuse." To the end, Bundy refused full accountability. Even his late-in-life conversion to anti-porn crusading, broadcast in interviews with Dr. James Dobson, seemed more like manipulation than remorse. He was always trying to reshape the narrative, always shifting blame. One final trick, and still he remained a cultural fascination. His case has inspired dozens of books, films, documentaries, including The Deliberate Stranger, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, and series like Conversations with a Killer. Some portrayals focus on his charm, others on the horror, but all circle the same terrifying truth: that evil doesn't always snarl. Sometimes it smiles. In the decades since, feminist criminologists and victim advocates have challenged how media mythologized Bundy, how the public, and even journalists, once marveled at his courtroom performance, his intelligence, his looks, while downplaying his victims. They were women, young, bright. They had families, dreams, futures, and they were taken. Many were never found. Some were left in forests, others broken, scattered, forgotten. Yet Bundy's name became a headline, a brand. His victims, too often, an afterthought. But not anymore. To this day, his story haunts classrooms and courtrooms alike, a staple of FBI training, a fixture in every major Ted Bundy documentary, and a case study in criminal psychology textbooks across the world. His life and the lives he destroyed are now a permanent part of the American criminal justice record. His crimes are taught not just as tragedies, but as failures of profiling, of coordination between states, of trusting charm over instinct, of believing predators wear masks. They often don't. Bundy didn't act out of passion, not out of heartbreak or sudden rage. He inflicted harm to possess, to dominate, to destroy. He once said, "The ultimate possession was in fact the taking of life and the physical possession of the remains." That's not impulse. That's design. And that design, that terrifying, meticulous design, is why his name endures. He wasn't the most prolific, but he was among the most manipulative, the most deceptive, the most haunting. And yet, he still walked among us, went unnoticed, unchallenged, for years, because we expect monsters to look like monsters. And he didn't. He looked like a neighbor, a classmate, a student in your psych lecture, a man holding a briefcase and asking for help. Ted Bundy didn't come from nowhere. He came from a family, a school, a society, one that missed the signs, or dismissed them. One that believed success, politeness, and privilege meant safety. But the lesson, the legacy, is this: no one ever really knows who's hiding in plain sight. And by the time they show their true face, it's already too late.